So, welcome to another episode. Today we're going to discuss what's classed as dark psychology. Now, to be fair, the word or the phrase dark psychology probably sounds a lot worse than it can be, but on the same space or in the same vein, it can be detrimental. So, we're going to go through a number of different ways that people can use dark psychology, the names that are attributed to them, maybe an example, and the impact it can have. You probably will have heard of many of these as well. And you may even think that I wouldn't class that as dark psychology. You're not hypnotizing anyone, you're not forcing anyone to do anything. But the human mind is a lot more receptive to certain tactics than we may consider or we may think. So let's go right ahead. So the first one is mirroring. Mirroring. Now, what mirroring does is it involves copying or mirroring or mimicking the behavior, maybe the speech or body language of someone else, which can create a sense of familiarity and rapport, as they say. The technique itself can build trust between the individuals and a sense of connection, making the target feel more comfortable. Now, just a quick aside for these or for this one. Actually, these things can happen naturally. When we really connect with someone, we can start to sit like them. We might cross arms in the same way. We might start touching our hair at the same time. But the point in these techniques being dark psychology is that if you're aware of these, you can short circuit them and do them in a way that's not necessarily organic or authentic, but to generate certain results. On the flip side, you can be aware if someone's trying to manipulate you. And that's why it's really important to understand these parts of dark psychology. An example of mirroring might be a salesperson or a manager or whoever is mirroring a client or customer's gestures, maybe their language patterns, the words they use, the tonality or speed of their voice, which can make the customer or client feel at ease or the individual feel at ease and open to persuasion. It's like if you meet someone with the same accent as you and they use the same slang words, you feel this guy knows, this guy knows. He's got a similar thought pattern than me. He's maybe had a similar life than me, and he maybe hangs around with the same type of people as me. And that's where you can build a connection and actually trust the individual more. And then that's where manipulation can happen. The impact of mirroring makes people feel understood and connected, as we've just said, and making them receptive to requests or suggestions, and ultimately being manipulated. The second one is deception. Deception. So this is where you deliberately mislead someone, or maybe you withhold information to give reality a sense of distortion. You can do this in a way that targets decision making for an individual. If they're not aware of everything, how can they make an informed decision? An example might be a romantic partner might lie about their whereabouts to avoid confrontation or consequences to maintain power in the relationship. Obviously, the impact of this is after a while, this prolonged deception can lead to a breakdown in trust between the two parties, confusion, And it can sometimes make the target more dependent on the manipulator's version of reality. On the flip side, if deception goes too far, you can see someone in a different light and understand that they have not got your best interest in heart at heart. We all probably know someone like this that we've thought they were our friend, but after time and time again, they act in a similar way that shows us or demonstrates that they don't really care. It might be that they never pay for rounds or they never reciprocate a gift. The third one is brainwashing. Now, it's probably not the type of brainwashing that you're thinking of, but it is something that is real. So, brainwashing is a longer term manipulation strategy. It's not something that you can just mirror someone and generate instant results. It's a longer term strategy. And you essentially aim to erase someone's belief system and replace it. You can control their beliefs through this tactic. You might isolate the individual, repeat the spiel that you're giving them, and cause emotional manipulation. An example might be that a cult leader isolates their members, cuts them off from external influences or speaking to other people, and then bombards them with repetitive messages, and that will change their belief system. The impact of this is that the victim can actually lose their identity. They don't know who they are anymore because they've been brainwashed. They lose the ability to think independently or critically reason, and again become reliant on the manipulator for sense of self and purpose. The news is very good at this. It can brainwash you into thinking a certain way that maybe isn't in your best interest. The next one is covert emotional manipulation. Covert just means you're covering it up. It's not open for others to see. So this involves manipulating emotions to gain control over someone's actions without them realizing it. You could guilt trip or give conditional affection or create an emotional imbalance. An example might be that your friend might say, if you cared about me, you'd do this. And what that does is it manipulates your emotions to get what that person wants. The impact of which could be that you feel pressure or guilt and you have a desire for validation or approval, and again, dependency on the manipulator to control decisions. The next one is body language manipulation. This is where manipulators will use non-verbal cues to assert dominance, comfort, or create some tension. It's a way, body language is the most important of all communication, and it's a way to convey emotions and intentions without speaking. An example might be that the manipulator might use intense eye contact or subtle gestures to suggest approval or disapproval without saying a word. You might nod or something in those ways, thumbs up in a way that you are demonstrating something without necessarily saying anything. And what this can lead to is it can trigger feelings of discomfort, maybe compliance, anxiety, and the target can sometimes respond without actually fully understanding why. Because, as I said, a lot of these dark psychology methods short circuit the human psyche, the human mind. The next one is the power of suggestion. You've probably heard of this one. And it's where you subtly plant ideas in someone's mind without realizing it. Think Inception, the film. And by hinting at possibilities, the manipulator can influence decisions and beliefs. For example, a boss might say at work, "Don't you think it'd be great if someone stayed late to finish a project?" Now, instead of telling someone, they've opened the door for a volunteer, but they've basically, with an underlying tone or connotation or message, said, "Can someone stay late?" The impact is that the target feels that they're making their own choices. My manager didn't tell me to stay, I decided to, even though the manager basically floated the idea. And it has a slight aggressive undertone. And obviously, the action only really benefits the manipulator, ultimately. The next one is using rapport. So, rapport creates a strong connection and trust with an individual. This is where you might find common ground, share personal thoughts, feelings, stories, and showing empathy. And the manipulator can exploit this bond. An example is that a con artist might use flattery, kindness, or shared experiences, and then later ask for favors, whether this is financial or otherwise. The impact is that once the rapport is established, people are more likely to comply with requests and believe that the manipulator's intention or intentions aren't harmful, even though they are. So the next one is what's called the Barnum Effect. And it's where people have a tendency to believe vague or generalized statements as being meaningful to them. This is where psychics and astrologers fit in. A fortune teller might say, "You've been feeling uncertain lately, haven't you? But you have the strength to overcome challenges." I mean, that could be anyone, couldn't it? It could be any Tom, Dick, or fucking Harry. But it sometimes or somehow feels personal to you. And this is how they gain control. The impact is that the victim might feel that this person really understands them. And again, this is where trust is gained and reliance on the manipulator. And this is where they can obviously start charging increased amounts for their services because they've got your hook, line, and sinker. The next one, and this is another one that the news and the media use, is and advertising, is subliminal messaging, which is where they send signals to you below the level of conscious awareness and it influences your thoughts or actions. So, advertising, companies might flash images or words quickly enough that the conscious mind doesn't notice or perceive them, but the subconscious mind does register it, and it's something that influences your behavior to purchase or otherwise. Subliminal messages can alter desires, behavior, thoughts, and it can do so without the target being ultimately aware that it's happening. So the next one is persuasion. Persuasion is a deliberate attempt to change someone's mind through emotion, need, social influence, logic, any of the above. An example might be that the politician will use emotional appeals about safety, your personal safety, your children's safety, to persuade voters to support their policy or their control over a specific area of legislation. The impact of this can lead to irrational decisions by individuals that don't necessarily benefit them in the long run, which is essentially overriding a logical reasoning or overriding logical reasoning that we normally would have, but we are being persuaded. The next one is personality exploitation. This is where manipulators exploit different personality types, and they do so by tailoring their approach based on the traits, insecurities, habits, desires, interests that other people have. The manipulator might flatter an insecure person to win their loyalty, or use fear on someone with low confidence. The impact can be that specific personality traits weakens the victim's defense, and it makes them more compliant and dependent on the manipulator again. The next one is gaslighting, and I'm pretty sure everyone listening will have heard of this. And it's a tactic in which the manipulator makes the victim question their own perceptions, memory, reality, and it can cause self-doubt. An abusive partner might say, "You're overreacting, that never happened." And you start to think, well, did it? Did it not happen? And what that does is it erodes the self-confidence of the victim. And it makes them more reliant on the manipulator's version of reality. Because if you think something happened and someone tells you it didn't have to happen, and they tell you over and over again, no, this didn't happen either, you start to question your own sanity. And then they will be in control. The next one is love bombing, where you overwhelm someone with excessive attention, praise, until you gain control, because everyone loves being told how great they are. Early on in the relationship, this showering of gifts or words and affection can create a sense of obligation. And then the target becomes emotionally invested, and the manipulator may withdraw affection at this point. It creates a cycle of highs and lows, and actually, the individual can then start chasing that affection and going above and beyond to get that back. So it swings a dynamic, doesn't it? And it creates a cycle of emotions as well. The next one is the halo effect. And it's when positive perceptions in one area, attractiveness, charisma, athleticism, can influence how someone is perceived overall, leading to over trusting. Celebrities probably have this a lot. Just because they're really good at football or acting, people tend to trust them because they are seen to have a halo above their head and someone special. A leader might be seen as more competent and trustworthy, even though they lack certain qualifications or a history of success, because he's charming. And what this basically means is that people can overlook faults and red flags, and this can happen in dating as well. If someone's really pretty, you can ignore those red flags. The next one is scarcity tactics, and there's not really much need for explanation of this one, but it's you create the illusion of limited supply, and people have a fear of missing out. You might hear the deal is only available for the next hour, and it makes a decision become rushed without sufficient consideration of other options and the option itself. The impact of this is this urgency can cloud the judgment of the individual, and it makes it easier to pressure the target into a decision that they may regret later. The next one is reinforcement and conditioning. It could be positive or negative reinforcement, and you condition a person's behavior over time, rewarding compliance and punishing resistance. So, children, if they're going to cry and not do their homework, you can punish them. If they're good, you can give them rewards. And this can shape their behavior. An example could be that a controlling partner might reward obedience with affection, but respond to independence with coldness or withdrawal. And this can then manipulate the partner. Over time, the victim alters their behavior permanently because they don't want to be punished and they want to receive rewards. And actually, it goes against their authentic and autonomous nature. The next one is framing. This is how information is presented to make certain details seem more important and downplaying others. And this isn't always the right way because you could frame something to look important and it's actually not, and vice versa. And you're making your decision then on that information. But let's give an example. A politician may frame a policy protecting families, similar to one earlier, wasn't it? Emotional appeal, not practical flaws. And it can significantly alter how people perceive issues. If you haven't heard all the information or you've already got a gauge on, then it's unlikely you're going to go away from that. It's like the old, two people have got this different stories about what happened on a particular day. It's harder for the second person. Generally, when you've heard the first person, you've made up your mind as to what's happened, and that's because the information sometimes when it's first can feel more important. The next one, the penultimate one, is foot in the door technique. And this is where you make a small request that the target will comply with, followed by a larger one later on. You can't ask someone for £10,000, but you can ask them for a fiver, and you can increase that over time. This small initial request and the compliance of it can increase the likelihood of agreement later on. So a marketer or a charity guy might ask for a small donation first, but then later it's a big one. The impact is that when you've agreed to a small request, you have a psychological need to remain consistent with them. And because you trust them now as well, nothing happened badly once you sort of gave them something, you feel this is a good thing to do. And finally, and just before I say this last one, there are more than this, but I think these are some of the key ones that you've either heard of, have seen in life and are now aware of, or ones that I think are probably more common. So this last one is reverse psychology, and you've definitely heard of this one. And this is where the manipulator suggests the opposite of what they want. Because human nature, we don't like being told what to do, and therefore we rebel and do the desired action anyway. A parent and child is a great example here. Parent might say, you probably shouldn't do this, it's probably too hard for you. The child wants to prove them wrong and decides to take on the challenge. The impact is the target feels they're making an independent decision. It's a little bit like the manager situation earlier, but in fact, the manipulator is getting exactly what they want. So try and identify some of these in your everyday life, and you'll probably see that they're much more common than you think.